This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is brought to you by StarCityGames.com and the StarCityGames.com weekly sale, where this week we have Ben's picks from Monday, February 7th through Sunday, February 13th at 11:59 p.m. Save up to 50% on whatever sales manager Ben Blywace has hit with the digital sales sticker. Visit StarCityGames.com/sale to save on a long list of cards, from Abundance to Zergo Helm Smasher, from a simple Virulent Sliver to Adventures in the Forgotten Realms ampersand promos, or even an unlimited time vault. And if what you are looking for isn't showing up on Ben's crazy list, just wait, because every Monday a new StarCityGames.com weekly sale starts up. Keep an eye on StarCityGames.com/sale, that's SALE, for the latest and greatest deals on Magic the Gathering, singles, sealed products, and supplies.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 43 of Dominaria's Judgment, a weekly bottom podcast brought to you by StarCityGames.com. I'm Dom Harvey, I'm here with our Relax, and today we are finishing out our review of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. We do have the full spoiler now, and so we'll be giving you our top, I guess we're going with top 8, because there's a lot going on in this set. We could stretch it out to top 10, top whatever, and there have been sets in the past where we have struggled to put a top 5 together, but for now, we have some results to get into and some earth to crack here to kick things off.
Yeah, I mean, this is an artifact set really underneath everything, so it shouldn't be surprising that there's a lot of potential modern playables, and I think that 8 cards is enough to really give you a broad picture of what to expect, but really, I think there's a lot more even past what we're talking about that I'm sure we'll be able to get into over the next few weeks of discussion of the set.
Yeah, it feels like the sweet spot where we can fill out the top 8, but there are still some tough choices to be made there about what to include on the margins, what not to include, some honorable or potentially dishonorable mentions when we get into all of that. For now, though, we do have our pair of challenges from the weekend, and in one sense, it's just the same challenge because we have 3 back-to-back top 8 appearances here by Mr. Kafuriet, of course, as well as let me get the names. Bob49, a familiar name at this point, Mark's competitor, who will be seeing presumably take Belcher to the top tables once again, or try to at least in just a few weeks' time. And then Harvey Sandwich as well, rounding out our back-to-back repeat performances here.
Yeah, and 3 unique decks between those 3 players. So really just what we've been seeing in Modern, where you can kind of play anything as long as you find your lane and stay thriving, I believe they say.
Yeah, unique in the sense of the decks are different from each other. So one copy of Belcher, one copy of Blue Eye Control, and so on. And then unique in the sense that one of them has copies of Think Twice in it.
Yeah, well, I was also going to say that one of them has Restoration Specialist. Okay,
that too. We'll start there, I suppose. This is a blue take on Hammer, a very minimal blue smash here for Lavinia Azorius Renegade. We have one copy of that in the main deck and no more in the sideboard, I believe. So just stretching there as far as creatures are concerned. And then 3 copies of Spell Pierce as your Thoughtseize replacement, I suppose, your go-to interaction of choice. And so this splash, I'm almost surprised that this is enough to bring you into blue, and I guess that's a statement about how much better this player thinks Spell Pierce is than any of the equivalents in other colors, or even stuff like Blacksmith skill maybe in mono white.
I think that some of this has to do with the fact that the deck that you're trying to combat with your counterspell is some kind of control deck, and catching them with their mana spent on a Wrenn and 6 or Teferi is a really, really big deal. Or like even a Spreading Seas. And if you were trying to beat combo, I think it's more important to Thoughtseize them and just kind of like pluck away the core redundant piece or non-redundant piece. But with control, there's so many cards in the deck that are like going to kill your creature or whatever. You just need to get them on mana and get ahead because you're a Lurrus deck. All your cards cost 1 or 2. That's how you win.
Yeah, to me, seeing Spell Pierce screams there is some kind of spell-based combo deck that I care about in particular, where that is the best interaction you could hope to have against them. And hey, if you get paired against Bob49, which if they're top 8ing both challenges in a weekend, then that's pretty likely if you're going deep yourself, then Spell Pierce is the card you absolutely want there. And maybe if there's a resurgence of, Cascade decks or something in that space, then Spell Pierce is the card you want. I don't know how good it actually is, or let me rephrase that. It is good against the control decks, but I don't know how reliably it covers you against all the things you really care about. So if you're playing Hammer against Azorius Control or these various 4-color piles, the card you most care about is Solitude, and Spell Pierce doesn't really do much for you there, for as much as I guess Luvinia does, so that covers the other half of that spectrum, but it doesn't handle the most important card. And then if you're playing Spell Pierce, that's a card which naturally has some amount of drop-off or diminishing returns past a certain point. You really want to compress the game and get it over with quickly so that Spell Pierce is effectively a 1-mana hard counter, and this list almost is going in the opposite direction of playing a longer, grindier game with stuff like Ingenious Smith, 4 copies in the main deck, and then doubling down on that angle with 1 copy, as you mentioned, of Restoration Specialist. This is a 2-mana card from one of the Kalador sets. It's a 2/1 dwarf. You can pay white and sacrifice it to return up to 1 target artifact and 1 target enchantment from your graveyard to your hand. So the artifact thing kind of writes itself there, but the enchantment half actually is shockingly relevant here in a deck which really wants Sigarda's Aid as its primary combo enabler, and then Urza Saga as its backup plan combo engine as well.
I'm surprised you didn't get to Weathered Wayfarer in the sideboard as this discussion of grindy cards continues. I have not seen that card in an Urza Saga world, and that seems like a custom-made interaction where you not only are chaining Urza Sagas with this card, Urza Saga sacrificing self like naturally puts you down lands, so it's relatively easy for you to just play your game as expected and end up down lands to activate Weathered Wayfarer.
Yeah, this can also get Inkmoth Nexus to set up some of those combo kills there in the air. And then also, the neat thing with Weathered Wayfarer in a fetch land format is that even if you are on the play, and in theory will be making more land drops than your opponent, you do end up at parity a lot of the time where, let's say you go land Wayfarer, they play their land, you now can start your turn by activating Wayfarer to find whatever you want, and then developing your lands from there, and then repeating that play pattern whenever you reach that equality. But with fetch lands in the mix, what you can do is, even if you are in theory ahead on lands, if one of those is a fetch land, you sacrifice that, and in response, you activate the Wayfarer, and the condition on the Wayfarer is you can play the ability only if an opponent controls more lands than you, and so you can put yourself down temporarily, even though you're about to be even again, and then be able to play whatever land you get from the Wayfarer. So all of that stuff comes together neatly. I don't quite know if this blue splash is worth it, for the reasons that I mentioned. I would almost think if you're going to the trouble of adding the second color, and it's a second color which crucially does not have the canopy land, because it's a non-Horizon Canopy allied color pair. And that's been the thing which I think has scared people off the blue splash in the past. Those canopy lands really are a crucial addition, if an innocuous one, to the mana base. And I would think if you're going to do that, it would be for more cards than this, or like doubling down on maybe Lavinia in particular. But this minimal splash taking Happy Sandwich, the player here, to back-to-back top 8s on this weekend.
Yeah, I actually don't think the canopy lands are as important in the Hammer deck as most people seem to think they are. I find that between Saga and Lurrus, you're often spending your mana on stuff, in addition to like all the other actions you take with the deck, that like 2 mana, it's not like a huge cost, but you often are like in a spot where you are just like run out of things and just like hoping for a lucky top deck when the canopy land matters. So it's a lot like adding 1 out of every 10 games it adds a 3% out or something. It's fairly marginal. So I think losing them is less of an issue and more of a question of like, are the blue cards actually better?
Yeah, and this approach is maybe more coherent given that, where when you also have Ingenious Smith and Restoration Specialist as mana sinks in their own right, then that's even fewer opportunities to put yourself down a land just to replace that for a new card. And less need to do that too, because you have more ways to keep the cards flowing. This list does have Mishra's Bauble too, which we see in conjunction with Ingenious Smith a lot of the time. Those two kind of come together, but then Mishra's Bauble is actually a nice thing to buy back with Restoration Specialist, in addition to its very familiar use with Lurrus.
Yeah, Restoration Specialist just absolutely adorable here. Just really, really adorable.
Yeah, don't know if it's good or if it has any long-term future, but certainly adorable. And you mentioned this splash being on the table if the blue cards are good enough. And we mentioned some of the blue cards from Kamigawa and Neon Dynasty maybe being part of that equation now.
Yep. We will get to that in my top 8 list, probably fairly soon on that front. In terms of the other decks that are repeats, nothing really to report on Belcher. There are no Blood Moons in the main deck and Maguses in the sideboard. That's it. No main deck Furies, just good old kill your opponent and move along. Anything interesting in the Azorius deck from this week?
We can't not talk about Think Twice, right?
Okay. I mean, is it interesting, or do we just have to talk about it?
We'll figure that out. So, Mr. Furiette, known accomplice of Guillaume Raffo-Tapper, there were some theories going around for a while that they were actually the same person, or that Mr. Furiette was Raffo-Tapper's alt account. But at the point where your alt account becomes known for racking up top 8s single-mindedly with various control decks, the jig is up at that point, and it's time to create Mrs. Kafuriette or some other alt to keep the chain going. And until now, I had not seen them in the same room together, but Mr. Kafuriette was present in Raffo-Tapper's chat this weekend, and in response to a question about Think Twice, said just the following: there are formats with Think Twice and formats without, which I think is a great way of putting it. And it turns out that one of those formats with Think Twice, I guess by definition, is Legacy, where famously Raffo-Tapper's team at the Team Pro Tour 25th anniversary, managed to register Think Twice in not just Modern, which would raise eyebrows by itself, but also Legacy in their Miracles deck, where they had a split that was like 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, 3 Think Twice, 1 Preordain, 1 Peak. To get the perfect scientific balance there.
What? What kind of science is this? What branch? I don't...
It's mad science or possibly some kind of like homeopathic fake science. Not quite sure exactly how official it is there.
Okay. Anyways, that is interesting. I don't know if Think Twice has a longer future ahead of it in Modern. I, for some reason, assume maybe not. But yeah, Azorius Control is certainly a deck that we will expect to see again in the future. Anything from the Saturday challenge before we get into the absolute nonsense that was the Sunday challenge?
Let's get into our nonsense of the week, I guess, in the challenge segment here, because a truly remarkable deck really stormed this Sunday challenge. 2 top 8 appearances out of nowhere, including the title itself. And this one, the leagues apparently are overflowing with this deck right now. This Boros, Boom Bust, Mana Tithe, Crack the Earth deck.
Yeah, I think we've highlighted some bits of this in the past, but it has recently come into a windfall from the previous set in the form of Voldaren Epicure, a card that is a totally acceptable 1-drop that allows you to create a permanent for Crack the Earth and sacrifice it. I think this ends up being better than... I guess you always had Thraben Inspector, but I think the mana is a little more biased towards red, but I could be wrong there. It's kind of confusing that like the other one wasn't a big deal, but this one is stock now.
Yeah, your mana actually ends up being more slanted towards white because Flag Zones of Trocare is a card that you really want to pair with both Crack the Earth and Boom Bust. And so you have 4 copies of that by default. And then not that many lands in total, even with stuff like Urza Saga in the mix. And that just doesn't leave you room for any additional or optional red sources. So you could have been doing this with Thraben Inspector the whole time. And this is a 2-of in the deck. I don't know how really essential it is. Maybe what is essential is the 1 copy of Bomat Courier to sneak in out of the Urza Saga and take people by surprise.
Yeah, that's how you give them the big beats or beeps, or I don't know. I really enjoy the 4 prismatic ending with only 2 colors, but that's just because they're never going to get past their 2nd mana. So why would you need a prismatic ending on anything bigger? It probably realistically is for Ren and 6, which is a card that looks like it destroys this entire deck. I don't really know what this deck's supposed to do against Ren and 6 besides hope to have prismatic ending.
Yeah, I saw a real roller coaster of emotions earlier from someone who was trying to take the deck for a spin in a league, found that Mana Traders was out of Mana Tides, suggesting just how many copies of this were running around. Not a good time to be singing up your Urza's Towers or whatever if if this is going on. And then they were able to find those cards and get the deck together. And then the next update was, my opponent just cast hard evidence against me. I can't possibly win, which suggests a possible a future the metagame could take if this deck actually has any shelf life.
Yeah, 4 Mana Tithe is something else. I feel like that's the exact kind of thing where like it happens one weekend and then never again until someone forgets about it.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there were so many opponents this weekend who dutifully went ahead and paid the 1 mana tax for the Esper Sentinel, and which could have been devoted to the Mana Tithe, which they had no inkling was about to hit them, and then they were kicking themselves before too long. But now that play pattern and that deck list is a known quantity, don't know how many people you can get with that anymore. This is a very adorable home for Esper Sentinel, which we've often talked about as a card which people just put in decks for no particular reason, and you really need a dedicated strategy that makes good use of it. And those really exist at either end of the spectrum. It's the decks like Hammer Time, which are trying to kill you as soon as possible, and your opponent never has time to pay the 1 mana, or it's decks like this, where the game might go on for 12 turns, but they just don't have any resources left to pay the tax with. And so this deck firmly on that end of the spectrum here. And yeah, that pairing of Esper Sentinel and Mana Tithe is that synergy by some definition?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would call that synergy. They're forced into making dumb decisions because your cards are dumb decisions in and of themselves.
Yeah, Crack the Earth is a really interesting card, which people have put into some truly heinous decks over the, 17 years now since that card came out in the original Kamigawa block. And I think this is the best home I've seen for it, which is really not saying too much. It's a card which is, to recite the text for people who understandably have not seen this before, Crack the Earth is just red for a arcane sorcery. Each player sacrifices a permanent. And so, as you can imagine, this is a card which gets massively better on the play versus the draw. And then if you can build your deck around it, you can really crack open the symmetry there to make good use of it. That being said, a lot of decks in the format have accidental ways to insulate themselves against Crack the Earth. So if you know that this card exists, maybe you just don't crack that Mistress Bauble, and that's a thing that you can feed to the Crack the Earth and, follow on with your main game plan there. I guess this is also, I don't know if this is a feel-good use of Ragavan, given that it doesn't feel good to be on the receiving end, but the idea that you can connect with Ragavan and then feed a useless treasure token to Crack the Earth, I guess is a more inventive use of Ragavan, might be the best way of putting it than many that we've seen. It's like an extra hidden mode that you get to unlock on that card. And as we go down listing, Mana Tithe and Crack the Earth and Boom Bust and so on, if you've played any amount of Magic Online over the past few years, you might be thinking to yourself, this sounds awfully like the Ice 9 deck, the infamous 16 land destruction spells and Goblin Dark Dwellers and so on. And it turns out that if you cut Goblin Dark Dwellers from your deck and you add some broken 1-drops from MH2, your deck becomes more fundamentally solid somehow.
Who'd have known? Play the good cards and then play some nonsense is a pretty good strategy for Modern. I will also highlight that outside of the challenges, there was a bit of a prowess run this weekend in the prelims with Max McVitie 4-0ing one with his Boros prowess list, and then also another player, Gigi, 4-0ing with a Jeskai list that's basically the same thing, but with iteration over Reckless Impulse and I think just sideboard Flusterstorm. So this whole red 1-drop setup just seems well positioned now as people move away from Chalice of the Void and towards more interactive decks that can actually get underrun by the cheap costs against relatively expensive cards.
I think just in terms of pure theory as well, the land destruction effects and certainly Mana Tithe both get much better when they're backing up pressure that you have on the board already. So in this deck, that can be Esper Sentinel, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ragavan. And so if you go 1-drop into Boom Bust, where you're breaking the symmetry there, or Crack the Earth, or Mana Tithe their 2-drop, or what have you, then you're already creating this continuous advantage over time. And each one of those disruptive effects translates into so much more. So if you think back a few years ago to when the red-green Ponza decks or land destruction decks, those decks were kind of a joke because very often they would blow up 2 or 3 of your lands in a row. This would get Molten Rained, and maybe they would even resolve Blood Moon or something. And it wouldn't really matter because they weren't doing anything. And so you would have the time to dig your way out of it. And then over certainly the past 2 or 3 years, their card quality just quietly improved so much across the board that those decks became legitimately good because, instead of trying to get up to like Glorybringer and Inferno Titan, it's, well, okay, here's Bonecrusher Giant and Seasoned Pyromancer and Clothis and so on, and you only have maybe 2 turns to dig your way out of the hole that they put you in. And I think a similar dynamic is at work here.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because in 9th place in this challenge was a different, I don't know if it's quite land destruction, but it's working in the ballpark. A Gruel Reclaimer deck actually got 9th in this challenge, which is just like Elvish Reclaimer, Ragavan Channeler, Karn, Red and 6, and like red removal, along with the like Urza Saga artifact shell. So there's a lot to be said about this, play the good cards down the curve in whatever shell you want to. It's not quite like Legacy Delver, where like if you're Delvering, you have to do every single bit of the Delver stuff. In Modern, you have a little bit more room to play like Ragavan with whatever 56 cards you want because it's a really good card.
Yeah, this Gruel deck from FNoop, Pete Ward, I think we mentioned this last week in some context, but seeing it put up another result of some kind here. And this is an interesting route to take here, where you have all of the good 1-drops, and then you kind of jump up the curve all the way to Khan the Great Creator, which seems like a pretty big leap. But in this deck, the Ragavan Treasures can get you there ahead of schedule. This deck even has 2 copies of Explore, which pair, I guess, with Ren and 6, and then they can let you activate your Urza Saga and take other actions on the same turn down the line. And then there's just the classic use case of jumping you up to your 4-drop on turn 3. And then you have the 1 Springleaf Drum. But crucially, there's a backdoor way to ramp yourself here too, where if you go turn 1 Urza Saga, turn 2 play a 1-drop of some kind, turn 3 you can float the mana from the Saga, find the drum, and then play your 3rd land. Your lands get you up to 3, and then the drum with the creature gets you to 4. And so that's, throwing away your Saga like that typically isn't a great line. But if you're against a combo deck, for example, where all that matters is getting to that Khan as fast as possible, you will happily take that trade.
Yeah, a deterministic way to get to 4 mana on turn 3 is always the idea, and Saga certainly helps with that.
Mm-hmm. Anything else from this week of challenges that stood out to you?
No, just a quick shout out to the Azorius Urza deck showing up in the top 8 of Saturday. I knew a few months ago, or month and a half, whatever it was ago, I wrote about that deck seeming to be like right on the outskirts of all the results, and it's over the last few weeks been actually breaking through. And I think that people are starting to figure out what worked in the original shells and try to work around that. This list is ephemerate centric, so kind of interesting stuff going on, and I expect to see a bit more of that archetype in the future. Not a ton, but a bit. And I guess Lutri did finish in the top 16, which I think we're contractually obligated to say, and that is the one thing we are allowed to say about it, because that is how that card works.
Yeah, maybe that could be some like Patreon stretch goal or something. It's just a recitation of all the cards, all the one-offs in this Lutri deck. But great to see that popping up. And I think the constraint of Lutri is just so overwhelming that you're not going to see a truly competitive Lutri deck with any long-term future. But the fact that it can pop up once every few months or so is part of the charm of Modern, for sure. And at this point, the most tolerable instance of companions are left in maybe all of Magic.
Yeah, look at it. It's such a cute little otter. How could you be mad at that?
Exactly. So with that, we'll take a short break, and we'll come back for the main event here, which is, of course, the full spoiler for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. If you want to buy Magic the Gathering cards, you know we have you covered, but if you want to sell them, that's never been easier too. With a 30% store credit bonus and the fastest turnaround time in the industry, there's no reason to sell anywhere else. Go to StarCityGames.com/sell and pick one of 4 convenient ways to sell your cards to us. You can use our buy list, you can ship your cards to us, you can come to us in person in Roanoke, Virginia, and if you have an entire inventory that you want to offload, we can come to you. Go to StarCityGames.com/sell for more information. Okay, let's get stuck into the full spoiler then. And as always, we will each be submitting a list for the top 5 segment that we do over at StarCityGames.com along with our other writers there. And we have the 4 weeks worth of formats on display there. So the standard top 5s came out today, a very pleasing amount of variety among that one, with basically everyone saying, I have no idea which of these cards are actually good, and I fully expect everyone else's list to look different from mine, and sure enough, that's what happened. We've got Alchemy, Historic, Pioneer, and then running things out with Modern here. And so I guess I could just take my top 8 list from this and slim it down and present that as my top 5, but I'm actually curious how many of those top 8 placements will survive this discussion that we're about to have here.
Well, I've already submitted mine, but I think I switched a card around after the fact. So I think 4 of the 5 that are my top 5 here are the ones that I submitted, and the 5th one ended up in 6th place. So we'll get to those when we get there. The 8th through like 15th slot is really interesting. I don't want to go on forever with honorable mentions and stuff, so I kind of just listed 1 and then a dishonorable mention of a card that I think is going to be overhyped and make people sad when they start playing it. So do you want to start with the honorable mentions we have listed or the dishonorable ones?
Oh, the dishonorable ones, for sure.
Okay. I've got Secluded Courtyard. This is the unclaimed territory plus, choose a creature type, taps for a colorless, taps for whatever color for the creature type, and it can activate abilities this one. Woohoo! What's going to happen is people are going to put this card into their deck, and then they are going to exit their event 0-1 after their opponent casts Fury. This is what I mentioned when humans started top 8ing events a couple weeks ago. I don't think this fundamentally changes that experience, and it's not going to be a good time.
Yeah, Canister just couldn't wait for the new land to come out and had to jump into a league with Slivers, and promptly after 1-4ing the league, reminded people that there's a reason that no one was trying this before. It just, the cards are not there, and especially in a format with Fury and Solitude and all of the other constraints that we spoke about last week, don't think this one is really moving the needle at all. If anything, if you are absolutely intent on playing humans, then this makes assembling that deck a lot cheaper, which is probably good, given that it apparently does not have that same longevity that it once did.
Yeah, you can skip this one. What cards did you have listed as dishonorable mentions?
So my first dishonorable mention was a card that I first saw on the spoiler today, actually, and that's Swift Reconfiguration. So this is a white aura. It just costs a single white. It has Flash, Enchant Creature or Vehicle. Enchanted Permanent is a vehicle artifact with crew 5, and it loses all other card types. So that's a kind of weird effect to pass until I saw a tweet that was going somewhat viral, which was just this alongside Devoted Druid, where this is the Vizier of Remedies you always wanted that can also be like an instant speed way to save your own Druid. So if you double up on these, then you have a layer of protection there. It can also be just like a good pacifism against a turn 1 Ragavan or something on the other side. This card seemed fantastic. How is this not getting more attention? This would definitely crack into my top 8 until I realized this is actually from the Neon Dynasty Commander release. And you would not know that unless you had seen the letters NEC just nestled in tiny font at the bottom left of that card. And this trips me up at least once every spoiler season if it has a Commander release alongside it. And this is more of a cautionary tale than anything else. Don't let this happen to you.
I'm just reading the flavor text on this card, and I'm wondering, like, it mentions cup holders. I'm confused as to where, like, is there, like, I don't know, do any of these Kamigawa cards have art that takes place inside, like, a convenience store? I'm very confused, like, because, like, a cup holder is, like, a thing that is, like, a standardized cup size. Like, you don't just, like, put your arbitrary unknown mug into that. I don't know. That's really bugging me now.
I have seen a lot of complaints that just the idea of a DJ on Kamigawa fundamentally breaks the concept of the world and ruins their immersion, and it's an insult to the history of the plane and so on. And don't let those people hear about the cup holders. They're going to have a field day there. But yeah, don't, like I said, easy mistake to make. I will certainly make it again in the future. Don't let this happen to you. Don't get your hopes up and then have them dash to shreds on the cup holders there. My actual dishonorable mention was Reality Heist. So this is the dig through time for artifacts, if you like. 5 blue. It costs 1 less for each artifact you control. So affinity for artifacts, if you like. And then it's effectively, look at the top 7. You can take up to 2 artifacts from them into your hand. This is a card which I think reads so much better than it plays. And it speaks to a larger issue with Modern, which we'll come back to with some cards that are actually on this top 8 list, at least for me, of there are so many payoffs for caring about artifacts, whether it's, Urza or some of the new cards from this set, or Word of Invention, Emery, Tezzeret, so on and so forth. I mean, the list truly is endless. And the realization that you come to when you try building decks with these cards is the artifacts themselves all kind of suck. It's the cards that care about artifacts that really get things moving here. And so if you are somehow able to play enough cheap artifacts to get the cost on this one down to a respectable cost, then maybe you get to turn up like a Mishra's Bauble and a Springleaf Drum or something, and that doesn't feel like a good use of your time. And if you're doing this, then why aren't we casting Thought Monitor instead? And if we are doing that, then that's a lot of cards which really are reliant on me having a bunch of cheap artifacts. So I think this is a kind of card which you see it on the spoiler and it looks potentially exciting or dangerous, but never, turns up in real life.
I also would like to point out, I think when this card was previewed, I made some tweet about like players who have never missed on a Glint Nest Crane getting excited to learn about stats and artifact counts. I just want to make the point that like your deck has to be north of like, I think it's like somewhere around like 30 artifacts for this to have like a reason. Like, I want to say, I don't know. Basically, like, Glint Nest Crane missed a lot. I want people to remember that. And if your deck has less than 30 artifacts, this is going to miss the second card more than Glint Nest Crane misses. Like, it's just the math isn't good and the cards you find aren't great. And like, I don't know. The only artifact I guess you could find Thought Monitor. I don't know. It's a real stretch. Like the actual real hits you want to hit, it's really slim pickings.
Mm-hmm. So with that, I guess we can move on to the honorable mentions, or the cards that just about missed out, but which maybe in a few months we'll be wishing we had put on the list in the first place.
Yeah. I had listed Moon-snare Prototype. I think after talking about this card last week, something I missed is that artifacts with colors have a pretty big role to play in Modern. And between this and Thought Monitor, you actually could build an artifact deck in Modern that has the proper artifact density and pieces to, make things work. That also gets to play Force Negation. I think that is something that has not really been explored, but it is relatively powerful when you think about what are the things that artifact decks traditionally struggle against. It's like, well, Stony Silence, Karn, Creeping Corrosion. If you look at Andrea Mengucci's Twitter anytime recently, I think that this having good colors, like just a good attribute, does make it worth considering in the Springleaf Drum slot in ways that we had not considered it last week. Just like, even if it is a worse Springleaf Drum, Springleaf Drum is supposed to be a disposable card, and this is a better disposable card.
Yeah, I had not considered the implications of it being a blue card either until I saw you put it on the notes. So shout out to you for that one. And you can see that that template doing good work in Legacy, where the go-to artifact deck now doesn't even play Urza, but it's just a 4 Force of Will and then sideboard 4 Force Negation deck, which between all of its artifact payoffs being blue, essentially, the 8 Thought casts and Emery and so on and so forth, you do actually have the required density of blue cards to just about make that work. And I think that may be a significant factor here in Modern. We will have more to say about Moon-snare Prototype, or at least I will, because this is a card that did actually make my main list here. One of my honorable mentions, I guess we covered some of these last time. Secluded Courtyard would have been one. Hidetsugu Consumes All, the Rakdos saga that blows up 1-drops and exiles graveyards. One card which we didn't know about then, but which didn't make my list just yet, is Experimental Synthesizer. So this is red for an artifact. When it enters a battlefield or leaves a battlefield, you exile the top card of your library, and until the end of turn you may play that card. And then it has 2 in a red, sacrifice it to create a 2/2 Samurai token with Vigilance, and you can only do that as a sorcery. So this is a kind of card which you start to see more and more reasons why Mox Opal probably is never coming back. But if you can find the right density of ideally free artifacts or just other 1-drops, basically if you are a deck which could use expressive iteration well in that space, then you're probably going to have some interest here. And so I don't know if you have good ways of like actually sacrificing this, or bouncing this with paradoxical outcome maybe is a little bit too far-fetched, but it feels like there should be some ways to get at least a card's worth of value out of this card, if not more.
Yeah, The fact that it triggers when you sacrifice it independent of the 3-mana ability on the card is really what I think puts it into consideration. I had not really had this card on my radar, but thinking through that kind of like, well, I can sacrifice this to Ravager and get a free card. I mean, obviously not Ravager because you probably want to be doing something a little less combat-y with this, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Can we sacrifice this to crack the earth?
Yes, you probably could.
That is a legal play you can make in the modern format of Magic the Gathering. Anyway, moving on to the actual lists themselves, I guess we want to start at the bottom here. Whose number 8 pick do we want to start with?
I'll fire off. I had the Reality Chip, which did not make your list. This is a card that I've been pretty excited about. The thing that I think you have to realize in Modern that we may have talked about last week is that if you crack a fetch land with the Reality Chip in play, you have already looked at your top cards. So this existing is just like a permanent Mishra's Bauble Peak. And that kind of makes the floor of the card, it is a 1 blue 0/4 creature. That's like almost Wall of Omens-esque at that point, where you're like, okay, well, I'll probably play this. I'll get a shuffle or two out of it. It's kind of, getting close to like a card's worth of selection, even if it's not like a physical card. And then you have the upside of it's just Future Sight. And then you have the upside of, oh, I can tutor for this with Stoneforge Mystic. I think it's a lot of little pieces that really add up to make a card that is going to have like a Shadow Spear style impact on the format.
Yeah, I really want this card to be good, and I think it possibly could be, if only as a one-of Stoneforge Mystic target for the grinding matchups, as people like to say. This might just be me overcorrecting for all of the truly terrible Mox Hammer decks I built in the past, or decks which this card exists in the same space as, and which never perform as well as I want them to. And so hopefully this one can break with that precedent there. My number 8 was Colossal Sky Turtle. So buckle up, there's a lot going on here. This is 4 GGU for a 6/5 enchantment creature turtle with flying and war 2. But more importantly, it has not one, but 2 channel abilities. So it has channel 2 in a green, discard this, return target card from your graveyard to your hand, and then channel 1 in a blue, discard this, return target creature to its owner's hand. So I think this is a really interesting option for some build of Living End, where you have this 2-mana cycler slot, where normally that's Waker of Waves in the green heavy list that players like Belfi have been popping up with. It can be stuff like Titanoth Rex. I think this is a really appealing alternative for a few reasons. So firstly, sometimes you do need to bounce a creature ahead of a Living End. So that can be stuff like Meddling Mage or Thalia, which is going to stop you from casting the Living End in the first place. Or it can be stuff which, maybe like an onboard Yawgmoth, for example, where you get to put them to the test right now and don't let them, sacrifice all of their material in response to your Living End and then just bring it all back right away. And it gives you this form of interaction against the best draws that can kill you even before you can resolve Living End. So against Hammer, for example, if you're on the draw, sometimes they're going to kill you on their turn 3, and this is a way to break that up, which doesn't trigger Esper Sentinel, among other things. Or against Burn, for instance, this can bounce the Eidolon, which would deal you 4 if you're trying to play your Cascade spell and then play the Living End after that. And then the other channel mode, it lets you buy back a Cascade spell that has been discarded, or if it was Violent Outburst, you cascade into Living End. Maybe that gets countered, but then the Violent Outburst is in your graveyard, so you can pick that up and go again. So it gives you some kind of resilience against various forms of interaction there. The other thing it has going for it is it just has good colors. It's a green and blue, which means it pitches to Force Negation and Subtlety, which is, true of Waker of Waves, true of most of your cyclers. But being a green card, I think, is pretty big too, because Living End, some builds of this have been flirting with either Endurance and or Force of Vigor. And if you're being honest with yourself, the green card count in the deck is simply not high enough to justify either of those cards, where it's maybe like 12 to 14 green cards total, and 8 of those are your Cascade enablers, which you really can't afford to pitch if they're your only copy of that effect. And just finding ways to fold more green cards into the deck for free really puts those cards on the table now in a way that they weren't before. So that's a lot of explanation there, but between all of those various factors, I think this might be an interesting option.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. My only concern is that if you don't you cannot just like proactively throw this card away the same way you can all the cyclers, but I think in limited quantities, this extending your colored counts and also your like interaction suite is going to be pretty important.
It might also compete with something like Brazen Borrower, which has its upsides, has its downsides. This does not bounce Chalice of the Void, for example, or Teferi Time Raveler, which are two of the big ones that you really need to get off the table. So if you expect a lot of those in particular, then maybe Borrower wins out just for that alone. But if you think you can afford to play the Sky Turtle, then that one should definitely be in the mix. Where are you at for number 7 here?
Well, real quick, I have one more thing I think you might have missed on the Turtle. You can bounce your own Shardless Agent. So you actually get both halves of the rebuy on that, which is pretty cool. Okay, I didn't think about that until like reading through it and making sure.
Sure, you can do that too.
Yeah.
I actually almost wonder if this is a card to go in like the Amulet box as a Summoners Pack target, where there have been a lot of otherwise unplayable green creatures across the years, which, because you might theoretically need them, have been bought out in single copies. But this one is kind of interesting, where it lets you turn your pad into a 2-mana uncounterable bounce spell. So you can actually Summoners Pact for an answer to like a Magus of the Moon, for example. Maybe that one's not the best example, but against Hammer, right? You're in dire straits, but having that option bails you out of a situation where you would be dead otherwise. Or you can play your Titan, finish the turn with 2 mana up, and now the redundant pack that's in your hand represents a form of interaction which you wouldn't have access to otherwise. I think that, and then also if you draw this, then you can buy back a Pact or a Titan that was discarded, or sometimes, as any Amulet enthusiast will know, sometimes you just cast your 7-drop and get to work. This deck can actually do that. So I think that one is probably not going to make it, but worth a look there too.
Yeah, I mean, worst case scenario, you can Pact for it and then rebuy your Pact and then decide later. It's no longer in your deck.
Sure. Real, transmute Grozoth for Grozoth vibes with that one. But I think that's enough said on the Colossal Sky Hunter. Where did you want to go next?
Yeah, I had the White March. This is the March of Otherworldly Light. It's in the X spell cycle where you can pitch cards to reduce the cost on them. This is the one that can exile a artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. I am not the most excited about this card. I just think that it is a useful tool to extend your removal suite in the same way that something like Path to Exile might in various decks these days. There are other members of the March cycle that I'm more excited for in other formats. But I think in modern March of Otherworldly Light certainly feels like a card that is going to serve a very specific role. You had mentioned Urza Saga last week. The format is relatively efficient. Just having more stuff that could kill stuff is pretty important. So I'm not too excited. Again, I think that paying mana and throwing away cards is a pretty bad place to be, but I am willing to accept that it does a couple jobs pretty well.
Yeah, I actually had this as number 3 on my list because I do expect this to show up, if only in small quantities. And then it might show up just as a 4-off in decks which can't really support prismatic ending for whatever reason and want some kind of analog for that effect. I think also the decks which have 4 prismatic endings and have an interest in more, so like some kind of control deck or the 80 card Yorion decks, for example, this is good redundancy on ending there, and I think there will be cases where this is a better card to draw, if it's sniping Urza Saga on the second turn or something like that. And I don't expect to be pitching cards to this a lot of the time. I view that as this kind of a fallback option where if I have to break the emergency glass and do it, then I will. But if I'm doing that as my normal use for the card, then something has gone wrong somewhere. I think this is, if this card is good, it's because you're casting it for 2 mana to kill a 1-drop, or you're casting it for 1 mana to kill the Urza Saga, and you're happy with that exchange. And so I could see this showing up as a 2-of, let's say, in Azorius Control, or maybe probably not more than that in something like 4-color, where you also have stuff like Lightning Bolt, which you can go towards as additional cheap removal. But I think this is a really useful addition to that roster, and I do expect to see this showing up, which is why I put it as high as I did. I took quite a conservative approach to the ranking in the sense that my top 4 are cards which I definitely expect to show up, and then there are some wild cards nestled in beneath there.
That's totally fair. And I think looking at it more, I can see it as an answer to Urza Saga and Chalice of the Void. Considering something like Hammer, where your endings aren't ever going to grow to any real large number, there's probably matchups where you would legitimately want to throw away a couple cards to KO some other permanent, but also need to cover Chalice. So I could see that showing up in that specific rule. So maybe I have it a little low. What did you have as number 7?
I was just going to say, you alluded to other members of the March cycle. The Green March might be my actual dishonorable mention for the entire set here in any context, where that card, I don't quite know who it's for, and the experience of looking at it for the first time is you see that it has a lot of text, and so you prepare yourself for that. You start reading it and you think, okay, well, we're in the Green Sun Zenith, Finale of Devastation kind of space here. This might be promising. Let's see what we get. And you encounter so many qualifiers, so many things that water it down, and by the end, you're left wondering why you went to all that effort and just more disappointed at every turn. And then, like, it by definition doesn't work in Commander, so it doesn't even have a use there, and I can't see anyone else having an interest in it, so I'm not quite sure who that card is meant to be for.
I believe it is for exactly one purpose, which is in Standard or other smaller formats. Once you have resolved what the metagame is supposed to be 4 weeks in and everyone is playing mirror matches, in green creature mirror matches, you can get crazy tempo swings by playing this and then taking other actions in the same turn. That is exactly the point of it.
Okay, I guess you could, like, you copy their Seeker's Chariot or something. I could kind of see that, yeah.
Yeah, that's really all I would want from it, is just doing that exact play, which I think about 3 people lifetime will realize.
Okay. Hold up, you cannot actually search for a Seeker's Chariot the way this is worded, but
no, you can. You just have to do it after they crew it on their turn and then fight their chariot. Very easy.
Well, no. You have to search your library for a creature card with the same name as that. So yeah, that doesn't even work.
No one wants this. Never mind. Okay, continue.
Anyway, so number 7 on my list, I had a card which appears somewhat higher on yours, and that's Tameshi Reality Architect. So this is the wonky Moonfolk thing where you can return a land, you pay white for some reason, and you buy back an artifact or enchantment from your graveyard. And we went into some detail on this last week, and our conclusion basically was there's a lot of cool stuff on paper that you can do with this, but we're not quite sure how that whole package comes together. You seem to be optimistic that it can, though.
Yeah, I think the fact that like the baseline usage of this card makes it really easy just to get out of any kind of exchange. Plus, like, you end up like up a card draw, up a permanent from your graveyard. Even if it dies, like, you're just ahead so much material. And then, like, ignoring even just like the combo potential with Lotus Bloom, like, that's the real thing that's going to go off. Like, if you build a Tameshi deck, it has like similar vibes to how KCI kind of started to go off. Like, when you would play KCI, you would maybe make a bunch of mana and go infinite and win the game, which is like the part where you like return all your lands, make a bunch of Lotus Blooms, like make a bunch of mana and then win the game with Tameshi because you made, 15 mana out of nowhere. Really, like, half the time what's going to happen is the scenario where you like sacked a few Chromatic Stars and Ichor Wellsprings to your KCI, filtered through some stuff, then ended the turn with like 7 cards in your hand for no reason. And that's just kind of the baseline on Tameshi, is you just like activate it a couple times over the turn cycle and cycle through some Mox Ambers or whatever. And then, I don't know, you just have a handful of cards and figure it out next turn.
That sounds like something I could be into for sure. I guess this is the same skepticism I expressed before of just there is so much wacky artifacts, curious stuff, I guess, in the modern format that I don't know if this has what it takes over and above all of the other stuff which has been tried and failed before, but I really hope it can. I guess in that spirit, maybe I should get into my number 6 here, which is in a similar space, and that's Tezzeret Betrayer of Flesh. So again, so much text on this one, so many applications for this that we went over last week. I think just costing 4 these days is a bigger cost than it's ever been, and means that it is directly competing with stuff like Urza or the other 4 drops, which are the draw to that kind of strategy. I think this one is kind of priced to move, though. I don't know. Yeah,
the thing about this card that we discussed last week that I really like is that you can make setups so that it costs 4, but then rebuys you a mana, much in the vein of how the Urza construct lets you tap for a colorless mana. If you have an Azorius Signet untapped after you resolve Tezzeret, congrats, you have mana, and then you're also activating your Planeswalker and doing all the Planeswalker stuff. the amount of cards you actually draw off this per turn is pretty crazy. Not even with the emblem, just like +1 to draw 2, discard 1 is a lot. It is a worse threat than Tezzeret, Agent of Bolos is, but I think that another thing we've learned over the last year is that color shifted versions of powerful effects are valuable because you are no longer tied to making black mana for your Agent of Bolos. You can just like play an Izzet or Simic or whatever color artifact deck with this card, and it's just castable. So I think there's a lot of things that point towards this having a role to play. I did do the Gatherer search for artifacts that you want to reduce the cost to activate. Unfortunately, I didn't find anything that was better than like a Signet or a Chromatic Star, but I am willing to believe, I think I said it was like hundreds or thousands of cards. Someone else will probably look through that and find something I didn't.
Yeah, I think you don't need to find some kind of blockbuster combo potential with this. If it is just cycling your Chromatic Stars for free or doubling up your Signets or what have you, if you have enough of those smaller interactions, then you're already getting a very good return on your investment. And as you mentioned, the +1 should not get overlooked in all of this, because if you have enough artifacts in your deck and enough that you're willing to throw away most of the time, that you are reliably discarding 1 instead of 2, that +1 makes this the best Ob Nixilis or the 5 different Jaces which plus to draw cards. This is the best version of that we've seen if you have enough artifacts to support that. And so in that shell, even if you're not aiming too high with this, just drawing, 1 point something cards every turn while adding loyalty, starting at 5 and going up from there, that's really appealing too.
Yeah, it's just a lot of cards. It is just a physical lot of cardboard going from your library into your hand. And I'm sure you can find something to do with it in your artifact deck.
Mm-hmm.
So my number 6 was Michiko's Reign of Truth. And this is the card that made the probably published top 5 on Friday, that I kind of bumped down after thinking about it, because I don't know how much of my love for this card is like, 8 to however many years, really almost probably 15 if you think about it, of playing with cranial plating, and how much of it is actually believing this card is going to be the card that makes Inkmoth Nexus and Affinity win matches of Modern. It's very powerful. Again, it is cranial plating where you get the pump without paying the equip. You just pay 2, you get a big pump, and you Michikos them. It's pretty straightforward. I don't really care about the flip. It will happen sometimes. You will get a big construct token. I just want to, +7 my Inkmoth Nexus or whatever flyer and win the game. It's been a long time of people getting burned by fake Affinity. And even in its like waning days pre-Mox Opal ban, Affinity wasn't even that great. Like even when Matt Sperling finished second at the Mythic Championship in London with it, it was like kind of a like long shot Affinity win. It was really good at putting up like 11-4 finishes at Grand Prix. I don't know. The card is really powerful, but you kind of have to play a lot of pretty bad cards to make it work.
Yeah, I don't know how good actual cranial plating is in Modern these days. You see the one copy in Hammer, and that's just because you can find it with Stoneforge Mystic, and so this doesn't even have that upside. And I found a tension when trying to build around this, where I really want to pair this with Lurrus, because Lurrus is like weirdly a pretty good target for the first 2 chapters on this card, and then that pattern of this is boosting up my other stuff, so they have to kill that. That then clears away for Lurrus, which buys back this, and then in a few turns, this will become a gigantic threat in its own right. That sounded very appealing, but then a lot of the other artifact-ish stuff you want to do is boxed out by Lurrus, whether it's Nettle Cyst, which I guess also is a similar version of this card, or the actual Affinity stuff going up the curve if you want to play stuff like Thought Monitor, Sojourner's Companion, what have you. So I don't quite know what the deck looks like that wants this, that isn't just a mostly worse version of Hammer.
Yeah, that is a problem. I do think that the appeal of these Affinity decks would be maybe assembling a like janky secondary win condition better than the Hammer decks. Like when Hammer beats down with cranial plating, it's pretty anemic, and it's largely just like a concession to Azorius control games taking 20 turns and forcing them to kill something. But I think that the Michiko's Reign of Truth decks will be able to actually deal 20 damage with creatures the normal way. But that I might be dreaming too much of like 2011 Signal Pest and not 2022 Signal Pest.
I do think that play pattern of you have a 1-drop and then you play this, you immediately boost that up and get to attack, and then you're threatening the same thing on the following turn. That 1 mana to equip cranial placing really does put a cap on how quickly that card can apply damage, especially in a world without Mox Opal. Whereas the 1 mana difference here, I think, could be relevant in terms of just raw Goldfish speed.
Yeah, it also counts Urza Saga as an enchantment for its pump, which is like a pretty big game changer in terms of like whatever your raw counting metric is. But again, and also like you can activate Inkmoth Nexus in windows where this card then triggers to pump it. There's a lot of good things going on. I just don't know if the like 48 worst cards in your deck are going to support it. But this card is very, very good.
Okay, I think you have talked me into this, and this would be floating around the 8th place / honorable mentions area of my list here if I were to do this over. Don't think it will crack into that top 5, I'm afraid, but still a perfectly good showing there. I guess I will kick off my own top 5 with Moon-snare Prototype. So this was your honorable mention here. I have pretty high hopes for this card, and I'm making a statement in placing this above both Tezzeret and Tameshi, which are much more flashy, have a lot more words on them. They're mythics and rares compared to this measly common. I think this is more important and less replaceable for what it does, because, as I say, the issue has never been, what do I do in my artifact deck once I have a bunch of mana that cares about artifacts? It's how do I progress the game to that point in the first place? And Moon-snare Prototype, and just to go over the text on this one again, this is blue for an artifact, and you can tap it and an artifact or creature you control to add colorless, and then it has channel 4 and a blue to you put a non-land permanent on top of its owner's library, correct?
That's correct. It's not on top. It's they get their choice of top or bottom, so it's either best.
Okay.
It's just interesting that they're going in that direction. I think that the alternative would be significantly better for this card, because like you're only really deploying that in these like really janky long games where you're just like, I don't know, this is the last thing I have. And it'd be really great if you could just keep your opponent stuck in the mud with you for another turn. But it'll probably do good enough whenever you activate it.
Yeah, I would like that in the spirit of, fun is zero sum. But I just think the experience of your draw step that you need to get back in the game has no suspense now, because you know exactly what it is. It's not the best one. So I think that templating makes sense, and you can expect to see that as a standard moving forward. I think this card, you can compare it to Springleaf Drum. I think that's kind of a misleading comparison, though, because the decks that want this, I think, would maybe have the 1 drum to pair with the Urza Saga, but otherwise, you're either a drum deck or you're a prototype deck. And now that Prototype exists, that opens up a lot of directions that weren't available before. And just being able to do stuff like play this on 1, play Mishra's Bauble, maybe tap those for another 1 mana artifact, and then have 3 mana available on turn 3, or just those mid-game sequences where you want to be an Urza Saga deck once you have this many artifacts, but you've alluded to this tension where if you're going up the curve, well, now that's mana that you can't spend on your Urza Saga, and then Saga's going to sacrifice itself eventually, and so you're down a land there, and maybe you never get up to the Urza, whose Saga this is meant to be, for example. And this lets you activate your Saga while doing something else at the same time, or once the Saga has gone away, well, now you can maybe still cast those cards at the top of your curve, or this is just enabling turn 3 Urza, for example, turn 3 Tezzeret, turn 3 whatever it is. You can find a good use for this card no matter what, but those uses maybe would be too inefficient without this card, and that's why I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, that all seems totally fair. And I had Tameshi as my 5th place card, and I think I talked about why, because these like end game combo setups are pretty important. I think the key is that when we've been looking at all these different artifact payoffs, we have really gone for uniqueness as the most important part of what's going on. We want the card that does something new and unique. And you did start off with a very fair point that like the cheaper card is going to be unique, or is going to add, even if Springleaf Drum already exists, is going to add unique redundancy. Something you touched on there that I think we didn't fully explore last week was that the 0 mana artifacts that you get to play to go, the turn 1 pattern of Drum where you go like land, drum, Memnite, activate, do something else. The ones you get to play to activate Prototype are way, way better than Ornithopter.
Right. You could still be an Ornithopter deck, conceivably, if you want to. But yeah, getting to pair this with Mishra's Bauble, which I imagine your artifact deck really wanted anyway, or Welding Jar is like a nice one-of for your Urza Saga, which pairs nicely with this too. And there are others. I mean, if you want the one Tormod Crypt, for example, against graveyard decks, well, that sets that sequence up as well. So it is engineered explosives, I guess, which you don't really want in a deck that's trying to litter the board with zeros and ones because it's going to get in your way a lot of the time. But as a flexible option that also increases your zero count, then sure, why not? And hey, maybe you're an Emery deck and then you have this loop there with explosives available to you. So a lot easier to fill in the blanks there than it is with Ornithopter, which often is okay, but can start to draw later on. And then Memnite, which is, I guess, better in a Ragavan board, but still like a heinous magic card if you're not really doing something good with it.
Yeah, out with the bad cards, in with the good ones. It's 2022. Stop playing Memnite, I guess. With that, we're going to take a short break, and then we'll get back to the really good cards, the top half of our list, the top four, and you might start to see a bit more agreement in terms of what is going to really make a difference in the modern format coming right up. This week's episode of Dominaria's Judgment is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel, your first stop for Magic the Gathering inspired stylings. Visit coalesceapparel.shop to pick up a t-shirt inspired by fan favorite Magic personalities, a hoodie from your favorite guild in the Ravnica University line, or just signal your intent to snag Keep in the Dark with an anti-Mulligan Mulligan Club sticker. Want to splash up a commander deck? Check out the Keeping It 100 sticker line and see if your favorite commander shows up there. Whatever you order, use code SCG at checkout to save 10% on your purchase at coalesceapparel.shop. Coalesce Apparel. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
All right, let's finish out these top four lists then. And I think what we actually want to do is we agree on three of the top four cards in this list. And I don't know how much we even have to add about these because we went over a lot of their applications last week. So let's get into the one card on your list that doesn't appear on mine. And I really want this card to be good, and I definitely want it to be good enough to be deserving of a place in the top four here. So I'll let you talk about Greasefang Akiba Boss.
Okay, Greasefang Akiba Boss is 1 white-black for a 4/3 legendary rat something. I'm gonna guess rogue? Might be a ninja. Pilot. Oh, pilot. That would make sense. But its text is, at the beginning of combat on your turn, return target vehicle from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste, and then return that vehicle to your hand at the beginning of your next end step. You may notice that the most expensive vehicle in the game is Parhelion 2, which is some crazy 8-drop from War of the Spark, which has a crew of 4, which notably is the power on Greasefang Akiba Boss. And what happens when you attack with Parhelion, which is like a 5/5 flying stuff? I don't know. It makes 2 4/4 flying attacking angels. So Greasefang returning Parhelion is 13 power of attacking creatures, which is absolutely absurd. The fail case on Greasefang is that it is a gold card, notably in Solitude Grief colors, that is just like a 3-mana 4/3, which is not even the worst thing in the world. The thing that really puts me into thinking that Greasefang is going to work in this format. I had it like as an interesting card for Pioneer, but I've already been messing with Voldaren Epicures in Modern. I think that there's a lot of overlap in the artifact realm of like Greasefang, Urza Saga, and discarding cards already. Like, I think you can get somewhere pretty interesting in a deck that's like any 7 cards you draw is going to be powerful and cohesive. When you start mixing this with Asmore, with Urza Saga, you just have a deck that does a lot of good things. And Ragavan. Like, it's not hard to put good cards together to make Greasefang work.
My mind immediately went to Smuggler's Copter as a small ball vehicle that sets us up well. Sometimes it's going to be a good vehicle to buy back with this. And if you're already discarding cards for other reasons, then that seems like a great part of that puzzle.
Yeah. It's also worth noting that like the card goes back to your hand. So like even just the case of just looping Smuggler's Copter every turn is a resource that you end up plus, which lets you, again, loot it away to an Epicure Blood token or do whatever else you would do with a card in your hand.
Yeah, to me, this has echoes of something like Storm's Herald, or Storm Herald, I think is the actual name, where you can build a deck around this card, and it's cool and kind of janky, and it'll 5-0 a league, and we'll talk about it in Nonsense of the Week. What is it for you that really pushes this into the tier that you're putting it in here?
Well, with Storm Herald, you have to play so many bad cards, and Storm Herald itself is a significant. I think that like Storm Herald as a card is significantly worse than Greasefang. Like, if I'm just going to have to play the game where my combo is cut off, I would much rather have this card, or like where I don't draw all the right pieces. You have to play a really all-in deck for Storm Herald with a bunch of really bad cards that are taking up slots of interaction. You don't really need a lot for Greasefang to go off besides the Parhelions. And that's really the difference for me, is that this is just like such a compact package to add to whatever other shell is doing similar things, that this card is potentially like the hammer, pun intended, or not pun, I don't know. It's very similar kind of concept to Colossus Hammer in terms of what it's adding to an existing shell.
Yeah, I guess the Parhelions are your Eldrazi conscriptions or Colossifications or whatever otherwise unplayable auras you have to play for your Storm Herald. The thing holding me back here is if you get that 1-2 punch together, so you get Greasefang into Parhelion, you make your tokens, you attack them for a bunch of damage, Parhelion goes back to your hand. A lot of decks in the format will be able to just untap and either kill you on the spot or undo all of that development, and it's kind of unclear where you go from there, especially as, like, let's say there's just a Supreme Verdict or something in the mix. If that one Parhelion is back in your hand, well, now you have to go through all of the hoops of discarding it again, and then even if you have the second copy of Greasefang to follow it up with, it's going to be hard to do that in an immediate fashion. So if it's about fighting over the board, then I can see this setup being good. But I have concerns here if you queue into Bob 49, then it's all over.
Yeah, I mean, that is a potential issue for the deck, and something that I think you are leaning on the Urza Saga part of the deck that will almost surely be there to address. So there's probably some wiggling to do, and definitely coming out of the experience of testing the Rakdos Vampires deck, I'm aware that it's really easy to build these decks in such a way that they like compete with mid-range and then fail against specific edges of the format. But I think that this is starting to get into the realm of like uniquely powerful, that you get free wins against the things that maybe you aren't the best against, but sometimes you're just going to get them.
I expect this would end up as one of those decks which, if we're being honest, is winning a lot of its games via Urza Saga, and that's subsidizing all of the weird janky stuff that you get to put in to have some fun with.
Well, let's be real. The Modern Challenge was won by Rakavant, but we're talking about Crack the Earth.
Sure. Okay. Point made.
Okay. What was your unique card here? And we can talk a bit more about this because it's one that I mentioned earlier.
Well, mine was the White March, the March of Otherworldly Light, which we kind of discussed the pros and cons of already. Our top three, I think, perfectly overlap otherwise, right? I guess, we had the same first place, second place, and fourth place here.
Yeah. So let's talk about fourth place, which is Lion Sash, which I think is a card that's a bit overrated, but it's, again, a card where the floor is really high, and like the baseline expectation is it's going to just show up and do its job basically all the time. This is the 1 in a white reconfigure equipment. 1/1, you can pay a white, exile a card from a graveyard. If it was a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash, and then it pumps whatever it is reconfigured onto for the number of counters on it. It's interesting. I guess the thing that's like easy to miss is that the baseline equip is +0 because it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter. And I think a lot of this card's equity is tied up in Stoneforge Mystic, but having a card that extends the toolbox of Stoneforge Mystic into interaction that isn't just blowing up your opponent's enchantments is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, so I put this card this high because I think the first copy is going to show up in a lot of Stoneforge Mystic decks, presumably in the main deck. Although I don't know about that actually. Where do you come down there?
I think a lot. Well, I mean, Hammer, it's a bit of a question, but I think against non-Hammer decks, I think the answer is like a pretty easy yes. Again, because the good colors thing is coming up again, where this is a card that you can pitch to Solitude. I don't know. It feels like a lot of the Stoneforge Mystic decks that are just like Stoneforging are going to be Solitude decks, just because of like the inherent interaction of like Stoneforge Mystic in extra against like people, and like I don't really want to cast the third copy, but I would love to pitch it. So I can see it just being like an auto include in. I don't know. Is there another Stoneforge Mystic besides Hammer right now that's consistently winning?
Not really. You could build some kind of Azorius or Orzhov or Jeskai Stoneblade deck or something, and it would be fine just because all of your cards are pretty good, but I don't know if that's a recommended approach necessarily.
Well, I guess appropriately, Aspiring Spike did preview this card, and he is the one playing 3 Sword of Fire and Ices these days, so that makes sense.
Yeah, I did in my preview article for Lion Sash last week. I did explore that idea I'd thrown around of a fair Pure Steel Paladin deck, where once you have a bunch of Lion Sashes along with the usual Stoneforge package and sagas and all of your other stuff, you have enough equipment that both Fervent Champion and Pure Steel Paladin start to look a lot better just in normal games of Magic. And sometimes Lion Sash is the premier threat by itself because you're against a graveyard deck, and this is a main deckable hate card that you get to play. So not quite sure what the merits of that approach are going to be, but I like the idea. And in a deck like that, maybe you're going to see more than one copy of Lion Sash creep in. I think I had 2 to 3 in some of those decks. For the most part, though, I think this is, a one-off in the main deck, and then, hey, maybe you want the second copy or more in the sideboard. There is another option, which is, we touched on ages ago, this idea of a mono-white humans deck with Lurrus that also leaned on Otawara and Urza Saga. And Brian Gottlieb had a deck in his article this week that was kind of similar to that, incorporating Lion Sash. It's tough there because if part of the equity of Lion Sash is tied up in Stoneforge Mystic, then you don't really want to be a Stoneforge Mystic deck that's competing with Lurrus, because that then prevents you from playing some of the top shelf equipment that the Stoneforge wants to have access to. You could do stuff like main deck the Lurrus and sideboard the Cauldron Complete, or vice versa even, and you can activate your Lurrus in matchups where the big equipment isn't doing anything. But something roughly similar to that might be a place to look as well.
Yeah, I think this sort of goes around a good point, which is that I don't think you want to be trying to Lion Sash the opposing Lurrus deck unless you are capable of competing with them in the grindy game that results after, they don't have Lurrus. The deck that Brian posted that has Solitude and Flicker Wisp and all this other stuff certainly looks like it's trying to do that correctly. But I think that one of the reasons I'm kind of down on the card in Hammer is that I don't think it's going to actually solve the problems you have, aside from maybe clearing up engineered explosives in the cyborg game so you can't get locked out.
Yeah, this is part of the issue of if you're drawing a bunch of Ornithopters and Memnites or redundant Sagada's aids or what have you, then there's only so much Lion Sash can do to fill in the gaps there past a certain point. But if your cards are generally good on average, then having this card which stops their ability to go up on cards against you via their companion looks like a more realistic way of fighting them on that axis.
Yep. I think it's time to move out of the artifact part of the set and into the lands, because both of our top 2 are the same, and they're the same lands, and these cards are going to be a big deal for Modern.
These are boring picks to have as number 1 and number 2, but I think it would be borderline disingenuous to have anything else up here instead.
Yeah, I think we can talk about the more boring one first, which is Otawara Soaring City. I don't really have that many expectations besides this really making it easier for the Cascade decks to beat hate. This is the legendary blue land, just taps for blue, untap, and no drawback there. And it has 3 in a blue, return target artifact creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand, and it gets cost reduced for legends or whatever. But really, it's just land that can bounce to fairy, right? Or anything else.
Yeah, I know Jerry is excited about this because it means that people will stop putting Castle Vantress in their modern decks when they have access to this. I don't think people are going to do that. I think they will just cut one of the islands, which is meant to enable their Castle Vantress to slot this in instead. So I would not be too optimistic on that front necessarily. But I think in most of the control decks that can afford it. So 4-color is a maybe, just because a land that only makes 1 color and isn't fetchable is hard to fit into the mana base. But blue-white control, for example, the first copy of this is a slam dunk as far as I'm concerned. And then you have stuff like the Team of Reclamation decks, which are popping up a little bit, where it's a 3-color mana base that wants to be heavily in blue, so that part is fine. And then also, this is a really nice card to pair with your Reclamation and your Ren and 6 and so on and so forth. So I expect to see this popping up in quite a lot of places. If there is some new strain of blue artifact deck that gets brought into existence with this set, then that gets to free roll the first copy of this in all likelihood. So expect to see this in a lot of places, and this is going to be a card which, there's only one copy of it in their deck, probably for the most part, but like, you still kind of feel obliged to play around it anyway, but then what are the odds that they have it, and then you run into it, and that whole dynamic, that second guessing yourself, is going to be a fixture of Modern for the rest of time, I think, with this card, and certainly for our number one card on this list here.
Yep. I think I would be a little more excited about Otawara and have it like in the discussion for first place if there was a lot more Murktide Regent around still. But I think for now, clear first place from the set, no questions asked, is Boseiju. This is if you haven't read this card, you really should. It's the green one of the cycle, and it has 1 in a green, channel, so discard it from your hand, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land. And the opponent gets to search for a land with a basic land type and put it onto the battlefield. This is just non-basic land that it destroys, and it searches for a land with a basic land type. So you're not going to run your opponent out of their fetchables, really. But like, just the spread of coverage this offers for really subsidized deck building space, it's really crazy.
People get so fixated on the idea of locking someone out by methodically just stripping away all of their resources over the course of 8 turns or whatever. You really don't need to do that. All you need to do is the first copy is going to blow up something good, and then you buy it back with Ren and 6, and now the threat of you doing that again is looming over every sequence they could take for the rest of the game. But if they don't play into that and they try and take some time to get around it, or they play more cautiously, well, the onboard Ren and 6 is going to be accruing an advantage in other ways, whether it's just picking up a fetch land or picking up a cycle land even, or something else. And they get to use their mana effectively themselves in the meantime. And so I think often the threat of this card is going to be almost as impactful in some ways as the card itself, in a way which, if you're just watching the game from the outside or you don't know the context, that's not going to be immediately apparent. But just your opponent passing with 2 mana open, and now that representing this whole new possibility, that is going to be a game changer more so than, the card actually being activated a decent amount.
Yeah, it's like just the threat of like, I think this is something that kind of, I don't want to say Boseiju is going to spell the end for a lot of these decks, but this kind of situation where the incidental interaction gets picked up by the decks that you used to prey on, and then therefore, you are no longer 65% against them, you're like 57% against them, and all of a sudden, like, it's not a winning proposition to play your deck. I think that is the kind of effect that a card like Boseiju will have on a few decks. I don't think that it necessarily moves the needle for Hammer. Maybe I'm wrong there. It may be actually like a huge issue that decks have incidental interaction against you game one, but it feels like a lot of the most interactive decks were already things Hammer had to slog through, and like another piece of interaction isn't a huge deal. But for something like, I don't know, Amulet Titan or Mono Green Tron, I can definitely see that in the cards and it being a big issue. And I think that something that is kind of subtle behind the scenes is that when we pushed like these artifact payoffs for this set, most of them were not artifacts themselves. And that is probably going to be important in a Boseiju world moving forward.
Yeah, Bob49 is on notice now. He was winning too much. Something had to be done. And so maybe this is their attempt at bringing him back down to earth.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, anyone doing anything with the no lands but all these lands decks is really getting them into nonsense. They should know that they're getting into nonsense. And whatever happens to them, they kind of deserve it.
Maybe we should get into some nonsense too. What do you say?
Yeah, let's do that. So with Boseiju highlighted, with the looming threat of whatever it's going to do to the format happening soon, we can dive over to nonsense and talk about some decks that, in the meantime, get up to some interesting stuff.
What's up, gamers? Ryan Overturf here to remind you to check out the 540, Star City Games' own Cube podcast, where each week myself and Ryan Sachs discuss anything and everything Cube Draft. From the perspective of cube designers and drafters alike, we're tackling topics like deep dives into specific archetypes, cube reviews for new sets as they release, and offering general insights for anybody interested in Magic's greatest format. Whether you're a seasoned cube drafter or you haven't dipped your toes into the wonderful world of cube just yet, I think you'll find the listen worth your time. Check out the 540 right here on StarCityGames.com and wherever you find your podcast.
Okay, we are about to close this out. Talk to me about Navigator's Compass? Question mark?
Yeah, Navigator's Compass finished in the top 32 of a Modern Challenge. Not just one, but 4. This is an extension of early on. There was, who was it that was playing the 5-color blue control deck with Urza Saga?
Oh, Charlie the Banana King, of course.
Yes. This is the latest extension of the Charlie the Banana King nonsense control pile. This is Steffi Weffy 215 with a snow control deck featuring Navigator's Compass and Dead of Winter. But also Urza Saga, the artifact snow mana fixing overlap. Navigator's Compass, for those who did not watch Sam Black draft Dominaria, is a 1-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life, and then it taps to mana fix one of your lands. I believe it gives it the land types until end of turn.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, but it is literally throwing away a card to fix your mana and putting an artifact onto the battlefield while doing it. It's just so weird. Which I guess you're recouping a lot of card advantage with Wrenn and 6, playing Jace the Mind Sculptor here. It's just a really interesting deck. The Fury, there's a list in these leagues that has Furies. The one in this top 8 is Furies. You're a 4-color deck. How many red cards are in your deck to cast Fury off of?
A very good question there. So one to ponder for the future. Let's move on to Glimpse of Tomorrow, which some could argue is inherently nonsense, although that has cracked into legitimate deck territory at this point. This version, though, I think is still squarely in the nonsense category.
Yeah, so apparently there were multiple Cascade 3-drops printed in Modern Horizons 2, and that's because this deck has discovered that you can Imperial Recruiter for Shardless Agent, which is absolutely adorable. There are only 2 Violent Outbursts in this list, a real departure from the past, making your glimpses maybe a little bit more reliable, but also there's a really interesting kill condition here as opposed to the usual, I don't really know. How did this deck actually win? Did your opponent just concede out of desire to no longer continue watching you flip your cards over? This has Maya Bredegard Protector, which is a Kaldheim uncommon, 2 green, white, legendary human warrior. Other creatures you control got +1/+1, and basically landfall, make a 1/1 human warrior creature token. So you make a bunch of those, which either makes your next glimpse giant, or you just activate Kenrith the Return King and attack for lethal.
Yeah, so we have this weird mix of humans. You got the 2 Mayas, the 1 Kenrith, the 1 Minota in the main deck, and you might think to yourself, okay, well that's an Imperial Recruiter target, but you can't even find it with Recruiter, so you're hoping to just raw dog that one, I guess, in game 1. We do have the other 3 copies of Minota hanging out in the sideboard, alongside 2 Neoform, and maybe the most adorable part about this entire deck list, the 1 Prime Speaker Vannifar for when you need to Recruiter for a Neoform for the following turn, and then that can turn your 3-drop into a Minota, and then I guess if that was a Pyromancer, then the tokens it made can attack and trigger it. You have to jump through a lot of hoops, is what I'm saying, to get all of this going. But if you want a transformational sideboard for your combo deck, then I guess this certainly qualifies.
Yeah, there is one problem. Glimpse puts cards from your library onto the battlefield, and so does Minota. So both your main deck and sideboard plans are completely cold to Grafdigger's Cage, but maybe people just aren't playing that card this week.
I'm frantically scanning the wording of Glimpse to see if it gets around it in some weird Living End-esque kind of way. It doesn't look like it does, sadly.
No, it really does not.
Yeah, I haven't seen too many cages around recently. If you need Graveyard Hate, usually you're going for something like a Nile Spellbomb or something more hardcore like a Leyline in the Void. So if you can dodge Cage, then I guess you can do this.
Yeah, you are allowed to do that. As is our last Nonsense of the Week finisher, allowed to do whatever they want in the Mardu colors. Selfie Sec, someone who longtime Modern connoisseurs may recognize as, I think, the person behind the Mardu Pyromancer deck that Jerry got second with at Pro Tour Bilbao. Yes, Rivals of Ixalan. If you actually, it's one of those things where like you look at their page and it's just like WBR, except for instead of the usual like it being 2 solid pages, like, yes, they've played this for the last however. It's just like 5 pages of results that are just all like WBR 5-0 League, WBR 5-0 League, going back to like 2017.
Yeah, so in those simpler days in 2017, Selfie was the trophy leader for a prolonged period. Back before we had Aspiring Spike and the trophy race and what have you. It was just Selfie grinding leagues for the fun of it, I suppose, with this very strange-looking Mardu deck, which over time became a staple of the format and also a fan favorite. People really loved that Mardu Pyromancer deck, and that was, when Faithful Looting was framed for the crimes of Hogak, depending on who you ask. That was one of the incidental losses that really struck a blow to many people there. And Selfie's deck has been mixing it up a bit. So right now, looking at their MTG Goldfish page, we've got some 4-color Living End. We've got a wall of UBG and UBR, as Goldfish titles it, in Modern. So we'll see what that is. Okay, some incredibly strange looking, like, grindy Sultai and Grixis decks, as you might expect. And I guess they're back on their bullshit, I suppose.
Yeah, this is Mardu different Pyromancer. This is Season Pyromancer, Stitcher Supplier, Lightning Skelemental, Unearth stuff. But the thing that initially drew me to this was the Cathartic Pyre. This is a card from one of the Innistrad sets. It looks like Midnight Hunt. I forget which one it was from because, same set, 300 cards each time. 1 in a red, 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, or discard 2, then draw 2. They made Faithless Looting again. You get to do this.
Sure. I guess Stitcher Supplier is some fraction of a Faithless Looting if you look at it from the right angle.
Yeah, it's a little sketchy. This is also an Ephemerate Grief deck, which is kind of cool because you also get to Ephemerate Season Pyromancer, and I guess Ephemerate Stitcher Supplier?
Yeah, you can Ephemerate your Croaxer to just make them discard another card, or I think the actual stretch goal here is you play a Lightning Skelemental, with the sacrifice trigger on the stack in your own end step, you Ephemerate it, and then at the beginning of their end step, when that trigger goes on the stack again, you Ephemerate, but then, it's going to stick around to your turn, right?
Yeah, you just need 2 Ephemerates, right?
Easy.
Super easy, and then they get to discard 4 cards and probably lose the damage. I'm kind of sad that there aren't more cool Ephemerate targets on the sideboard, but I would like to think Selfie also had some self-respect and was trying to build a reasonable deck. There is a relative lack of Kaya's Guile here. I mean, there's 1 in the sideboard, but it feels like the kind of card I would almost want more of by default.
Look, we had to make room for the 4 Lingering Souls here, which those are bulletproof.
Yeah, I guess with Stitcher Supplier, you do need to get some action somewhere.
Yeah, that's a card which, if you think back to how format defining that one legitimately was in the 2014, 2015 era of Modern, things have moved so far since then. The idea of putting that card in your deck seems inconceivable now.
Yeah, I mean, it always kind of sat in this space where, like, if a bunch of 1/1s were very good, it was the kind of card that would obsolete your opponent's entire deck. And if a bunch of 1/1s weren't that good, then you didn't really know what it did.
You can sacrifice them to crack the earth.
That's true. You can sacrifice them to the 2 Goblin Bombardments in this list.
I guess you can do that too. On that note, any other nonsense either here or just miscellaneous nonsense to get off the docket here?
I think that about covers it.
All right, so we will be back with some topic of some description next week. Not quite sure yet. In the meantime, you can find me on Twitter at DumbandHarvier. You can find Ari on Twitter at ARMLX. You can find our top 5 lists and also a bunch of other people's top 5 lists over at Star City Games. And I'm sure each of them will be diving into Kamigawa for their own purposes this week. So make sure you check all of that out. You can find us on, I guess, whichever podcast platform you're using now, but make sure you go and give us a nice review on that, help to juice the SEO a little bit. And until next week, we will talk to all of you again soon. Take care, everyone.